In the previous mini-lecture, we saw that in Jnana Yoga, the primary focus is on a kind of philosophical inquiry to realize one's relation to God by reading texts like the Upanishads and contemplating one's true nature and hopefully realizing the deep inner sense of self, the Atman, and how that is identical to Brahman. We also said, though, that there is meditation involved in that process, and in the second approach here, Raja Yoga, it's just kind of the inverse of that. The focus shifts towards meditation, but it also involves some very deep philosophical inquiry. Now, the earliest version of this it goes back to a group of sutras called Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and they were written around the time of the Buddha, approximately 2,500 years ago. And in fact, many scholars suggest that because this system resembles the Buddhist system so closely, and because actually the Buddha was enormously influential in the development of Hinduism, that it's quite possible that this system itself owes a lot to the Buddha. Now, we'll get to Buddhism in a different section of the course. We'll see that the Buddha taught an eightfold path, and likewise in this system there are 8 different elements. The elements, however, are not identical to the Buddha's, but the overall sense is pretty similar. That's to say we start off in the mundane world and focus on acting the right kind of way, moral conduct. So in our most external sense of who we are, we're an individual being in a broader world with other human beings and animals, and we have to learn how to exist in harmony with them because, of course, there's an underlying assumption that we're all deeply interconnected. But in order to move beyond that more external, subjective sense of self, you need to start developing yoga postures. These are the same kind of thing that many Americans have practiced when you go to a yoga studio and you adopt these different postures. And as with what happens in America, the next step is the breathing techniques. And so you adopt these postures and you start focusing on how you're breathing and getting these very deep breathing meditation. And it goes on until you withdraw from the senses entirely, and you get deeper and deeper into the mind. And the mind becomes more and more concentrated until you attain this level of samadhi. This ultimately would be union with Brahman, but one can attain different levels of samadhi. So you could have a very deep, focused, concentrated sense of mind that doesn't fully realize moksha. But through the practice over time, the idea is that eventually you will attain that full realization and bring the cycle of rebirth to an end. Now, over the centuries, you see a variety of different meditation techniques develop. This one is worth mentioning here. It's called Kundalini Yoga. It's a kind of tantric practice, and this too has become very popular in the West. Some of you may have heard some aspects of this, and some of you might not. But the idea is that as you breathe in the vital energy in the air, and you circulate that breath right down to the base of your spine, and these different points along the way are called chakras. That's probably a word that some of you will recognize. And these are different energy centers. And the idea of Kundalini Yoga is that these energy centers become blocked and the energy is unable to properly flow through the body. But through visualizing the movement of this energy through your body, you open these energy centers up, and each different energy center is associated with different kinds of religious experience, and you gradually, through years of practice, will learn how to make that energy rise right up through this line up to the top of your head, and when you bring all of that energy and all the vital energy is circulating through your body perfectly, that's when you'll attain that kind of God realization. So that's another technique that one can use. The last thing that I'll just mention would be a technique that is called transcendental meditation. That's associated with a figure named Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, You may have heard of him because he was the guru or the master that the Beatles studied with. And through him and more properly speaking, through the Beatles who studied with him and that helped to make him very popular, that he had an enormous influence in the 60s and 70s on the development of all kinds of spiritual practices in the West. And so his particular approach and technique, although it's really nothing new, it's something that certainly goes back thousands of years, but he focused on mantra practice. Mantra, again, probably a word people are familiar with. A mantra is a sacred sound where the sound itself produces this resonance with the cosmos. In fact, the sound is that through which the realities that it's associated with come into being. The most famous one of those is Om. And so when you think about somebody sitting down and meditating, perhaps you think of them saying Om. And that sound Om is associated with Brahman's creation of the universe. It is through the sound Om that the universe comes into being. And so there are a variety of different mantras that one can use, but the idea is that by practicing these mantras, one can attain the same kind of very concentrated state of mind and thereby attain moksha. So you can go and read the little bits of information here. There's not too much there, but of course there's always links. You can explore them, and then I'll come back with the next lecture